Knitting is one of the safest pursuits we have. It's soft, it's quiet, and it's done by grannies all over the world. It sits very neatly within our collective perception of something that exists outside of politics. But what happens when we scratch beneath the surface and start to see knitting not as comfort or creativity, but as a tool through which labour is domesticated and value is minimised, and economic pressure is diverted inward into our private lives? Fibre arts is just a hobby, just something people do with their hands. So why exactly does knitting feel so harmless? And how does this perception of harmlessness serve as a benefit within a late-stage capitalist framework? Because in this economic climate, nothing becomes this widespread, this visible, and this emotionally loaded without also becoming useful to the system that surrounds it. Knitting is small scale, manual, and somewhat intimate. It happens in living rooms, on sofas, on buses, and in waiting rooms. It doesn't look like industry and it doesn't look like work. And that's exactly what makes it culturally interesting to me. Knitting lets us see exactly how labor, gender, and class and value gets minimized when it appears as something personal and socially ubiquitous. We often talk about knitting as leisure, as something people choose to do in their free time. But historically, knitting has never only been about leisurely activities. Knitting has been a part of household and nationwide survival. During the First and Second World War, people were encouraged to knit essential items for soldiers as part of their collective war effort and as part of doing their bit for their nation by organizations like the Red Cross. Fibre crafts have always been an integral part of unpaid domestic labour. If you're watching this, chances are that you are a fibre crafter. So while we are well versed in the relaxation of a mindless knit, shout out to swaths of stockinette in the round, which is my personal love language. But wartime knitting was definitely a different thing. People were expected to always carry a project on them and work until their fingers were exhausted, because at the end of the day, they were providing essential items that the soldiers literally in the trenches needed. Knitting has always been a part of care, mundane but essential clothing provision for families and communities where money was limited or income unreliable. For a long time, knitting was not the creative pursuit that we are free to explore today. It was work, necessary work. And like most domestic forms of labour, it was feminized and made invisible and not counted and certainly not protected and also not valued as economic input, but more on that later. It was very much framed as duty and virtue. Fibre arts like knitting and crochet carry a very specific cultural tone. It is coded as gentle and non-confrontational, as respectable and safe. It usually does not disrupt domestic and public spaces or look like protests. But that makes knitting incredibly compatible with dominant ideas of femininity and care. It's productive and quiet, skilled but modest. It's really time consuming but also framed as relaxation. This is not an accident. This is how a lot of women's labour has been categorized and perceived. It's valuable, but only if it doesn't ask for recognition. What's currently changed is not that knitting has become political, it's that knitting has now become marketed as aspirational lifestyle. Over the last decade or so, fiber arts? Fiber arts has been rebranded as mindfulness, self-care, and creative well-being, a means to live intentionally and opt out of fast fashion. But what I'm specifically interested in is what knitting has been proposed as the solution to. Because in the backdrop of this shift is not calm and relaxation. It's economic, political, and social instability and gig economies. It's housing insecurity and mounting costs. It's burnout and exhaustion. While we are all scrambling and buckling under the weight of economic and political tyranny, crafting almost relocates that personal agency. You can't change your rent, but you can choose what yarn you want to use for a project. You can't fix your employment conditions, but you can finish a project. Yes, I realize that these are quite ludicrous comparisons, but knitting, like many hobbies and pursuits, becomes a place where control is made available privately, because collective and structural control feels to us so out of reach. To echo, but not to regurgitate past arguments, knitting is one of the quietly political roles of hobby culture right now. It helps people regulate their relationship to precarity and helplessness, not by changing the conditions responsible, but by giving people the tools to cope within it. And again, I want to be careful here. Coping is not weakness, it is part of our survival kits. Because politically, as I have said on this channel before, there is a difference between survival practices and structural change. Knitting used to be expected to do the work of paid labour forces and is increasingly asked to do the emotional work that once fell within the remit of well-established social structures. Crafting is used to hold stress, to hold grief, to hold burnout and uncertainty, economic and political pressure, but just do it quiet, damn it. Under late stage capitalism, leisure becomes capital. Free time for the sake of it becomes wasteful, and enjoyment becomes something that needs justification. And so the logical consequence of this is that our hobbies get reframed, not as pleasure, but as potential. Potential income, potential content or brand endorsement, personal enterprise. Knitting is particularly well suited to this shift because it already sits within a history of unpaid labor. It already looks productive, and as we have established, it already has moral approval. So it transitions very easily from hobby to hustle. This is one of the reasons that I think that knitting feels politically and economically safe. It does not challenge the already high demand on our time. It adds labor onto it by actively bringing capitalistic ethos into our homes and into our free time, our personal time off the clock. So even while we rest, we are outputting. So this is what I mean when I say that knitting is a very useful tool within late stage capitalism. Not because knitting itself is bad, because the framing of knitting reinforces the idea that we should continually extract value from ourselves, even at rest. So I all too well know the pressures to turn hobbies into income. For a lot of people right now, making things for the sake of it just isn't framed as meaningful. It's framed as wasteful unless it can be sold, unless it can be turned into a lucrative side hustle to justify itself financially. We are told, if you are good at something, monetize it. This reshapes what making is supposed to be and turns it into productivity and performance. It turns community into audience, where slow making becomes a private business model instead of shared social practice. And I want to be very clear here. There is nothing wrong with selling your work. There is nothing wrong with being paid for your skills. I mean, what else is there to do under the sheer weight and demand of the capitalistic regime? I have someone in my life, and every time they see my knits, they say, hey, you should really sell your work. But that very same person on a few occasions has sent me screenshots of somebody wearing a knit in a TV show or a movie with the question, can you knit this? And I have fallen into this trap. I have fallen into this trap before, when I thought that they were asking this question to ascertain my skill level, but they were genuinely asking if I could knit the thing for them, with literally zero mention of paying me for my skills, for my work, for my time. And that's the very same person who told me that I should sell my work. So
make it make sense.
That contradiction shows me very clearly that while we want to extract profit from our hobbies, we are still unwilling to recognize, let alone pay for, the labor that would make that business possible. So not much has changed since 1945. Similarly, if you are a crafter and would like to monetize your work to supplement your income in this particular craft, in this particular niche, compared to all the others, there are very limited ways to do this. Of course, you can sell your makes or you can create content, but as far as brand deals or product testing within our particular crafting space, in most other niches, people get paid cash money, but yet we are expected to give our labor in exchange for yarn or other crafting materials like a pattern. This definitely speaks upon the value that we place on fiber arts, but that's a different video altogether. As previously discussed, knitting served a purely functional role historically as a way for families to clothe their loved ones cheaply. But knitting has now transcended out of that space and makes high demands of one's time, space, light, materials, tools, and increasingly digital infrastructure. The ability to sit and knit with any degree of regularity depends on your working hours, your caring responsibilities, your housing conditions, and your energy. So when knitting is presented as universally accessible, that narrative erases socioeconomic conditions that make it possible for some people and very hard for others. Knitting culture often talks about inclusion, talks far less about access. This matters because not all knitting is equally visible. Knitting becomes culturally meaningful when it is documented well, photographed well, shared well, and marketed well, which usually requires time, confidence, technological literacy, and emotional labor. So even before money enters the picture, knitting culture has already categorized people. It rewards those who can present their knitting attractively and consistently, appeasing those algorithms. So all of this leads us to a difficult but important idea. Crafting, as it is currently framed and circulated, can function as a stabilizer for a broken economic system. Not because we are doing anything wrong, but because the cultural story that surrounds fiber arts can help us survive systems that are fundamentally unjust. It offers relief, it offers meaning. It also offers a sense of control without demanding that the economic structures producing insecurities be addressed. And that is not a moral issue, it's a political arrangement. Crafting is certainly not unique here. Karl Marx once said of religion that it is the opiate of the people, meaning it is a tool for distraction. And the same can be said not only of fiber arts, but of anything that people enjoy in their leisure time. But crafts like knitting is a particularly apt example of this, because it also sits within the intersection of gendered labor, domestic work, creative identity, and economic precarity. It shows us how easily care-based practices can be absorbed into productivity culture and how easily creativity can be reframed into self-management. This video is part of a series that I'm working on entitled Craft, Money and Power, where I explore ideas surrounding craft, culture and identity politics. Because as a lifelong student of sociology, it is an interest and a passion of mine. I really do not have any answers. This is just a corner of the internet where I put down my musings. So if this is also an area of interest for you, don't be afraid to hit that like and subscribe button. I hope you have enjoyed this video and I will hopefully see you in the next one.